Hi, my name is EIko Kawabe Brown. I'm a filmmaker based in Toronto, Canada, and we are actually working on a film project, Landscapes of Home, and then also a Nikkei Canadian Story.
I was born and raised in South Korea, but I studied film in Japan and immigrants in Canada. So I was working in Japan, Korea, and Canada as a film director and producer and editor.
Unlike Alice, I have no filmmaking background, but back in 2017, I sat next to Alice in one of the film festival, and we started talking about the project that Alice was working on.
My recent focusing for making film is exploring immigrant experiences. So I made my Canadian first film, and that title is Haru's New Year. This film, it was the very first film I made with EIko.
And then from that on, I just learned every part of filmmaking from Alice.
And then after that, we explored Chinese immigrant story titled Signal Fire. We explored the Japanese Canadian descendant artist, and that title was History in Paper. And expanding on this theme, our current documentary titled Landscapes of Home as a feature version, and its cut down version title is A Nikkei Canadian Story.
The first, we started with Robinson family. I was a friend of a Robinson family member. We had a conversation about her family and her family history. They were actually missionary based in Japan at the turn of century. The war happened, World War II. They had to all leave Japan to move back to Canada. The steward, Cooper Robinson, was a doctor stationed in New Denver, Japanese Canadian internment camp. And he had experience being among the Japanese Canadians. This was actually after the war.
Once we found Robinson family, I was fascinated to talk about Japanese Canadian internment camps because I feel like it is a really important story. But then I feel there is a weakness to talk about this history by Dr. Stuart Cooper Robinson. Informed, like, is there anybody knows Dr. Stuart Cooper Robinson who worked as a doctor at the New Denver internment camps? Because I was approaching to the Japanese Canadian Facebook group, and one gentleman, Henry Shibata, fascinated to reply my answer very clearly with a vivid memory. And then she told me at that time he was like 90 years old, but then he explained so much things with his vivid memory. So I was just falling in love with him. And then I really interested in his story. And then now he talked to me like after he finishes his internment camps, he went to Hiroshima. So I feel like, what, is there another challenge for his life? So I really wanted to meet him. And after I met him, I found one more pillar to talk about Japanese Canadian internment camps. That's how we found Dr. Henry Ryusuke Shibata.
Canadian internment camp, the experience is very similar to American incarceration experience. There were 120,000 in the United States of America in 1941, Japanese American population. We had about 23,000 Japanese Canadians lived mostly in British Columbia. But of course, at the Pearl Harbor attack, and the United States and Japan were in the war. Canada was not directly involved, but they had a threat of these West Coast being heavily a defense zone. The government used the term relocate Japanese Canadian people into interior of British Columbia, mostly in 10 camps in Rocky Mountains. In the United States, I believe there are also 10 main camps in a desert area. At the end of the war, Japanese Canadians actually were not allowed to return to the West Coast until 1945. And there were 4,000 people actually left Canada, and others actually scattered all over Canada. So they did not form ethnic towns like they did in the pre-war, but they had more inter-ethnicity and intercultural marriage than Japanese Americans, interestingly.
So our first premiere screening was held in Toronto Japanese Film Festival at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto. It was some huge audience. It was about 200 people. They gave me different questions, such as why, as a third-party person, because I'm not Japanese descendant or Japanese immigrant, I'm Korean, but why did you make this film? And what was the theme you wanted to talk about? So I answered that as an immigrant, and I think this is a universal story. Whenever I stayed in Japan or Canada, I always feel I was the person who stands out in the marginal line. And sometimes it's lonely, but also sometimes you can observe many things. You cannot be observing if you are in a center. So before finding Henry, we met various interviewees. Our concern was that we are not Japanese descendant, but then probably because of that, some potential interviewee told me like, I never talked this to my grandchild, but I can tell you because you are Korean, you are the different person. So they really shared their interesting story or their deep story with me. So I really do appreciate it with that.
I would say, we are portraying Dr. Henry Shibata himself in this film, but there are many others. Their stories, each one of them different, each one of them are very important. And I'm sure others too, we would like to be the filmmakers who can actually help to keep their stories alive in the generations to come. Because I think with the current environment we live in and society, their experience is not something happened in history. We need to know and we need to acknowledge and pass on to the future, for sure. So I hope we will be a small help to do that.